what I want to talk about today, the title of my talk is Beyond Sustainability. And this is because, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, we are facing a massive environmental crisis right now. When we talk about the environmental crisis we are facing, the sustainability issues, especially with regard to our food and agriculture system, the reality is there is one single industry that is driving almost every major environmental problem on this planet more than any other industry. And I'm sure, as many of you can guess, that is animal agriculture. And I'm going to talk briefly, just briefly about why, but this graph here, this chart I have, this is so powerful to me because it shows us over the years exactly what we have done to the environment with animal agriculture. So the green bar up there represents free-living wild animals. So you can see 10,000 years ago, the biomass of mammals on our planet was made up of free-living wild animals. And by 1950, and 1900 and 1950, that has dramatically decreased. The green has gone away. And we add the blue and red bars. The red are humans. So we hear a lot of people talk about population and how that's driving a lot of our environmental problems. But take a look at that blue bar. Those blue bars through the years are the domesticated land animals that we are breeding, raising, and killing for food, largely, around the world. This is the reality of what has happened to our planet over time. So we can talk about human population, but that's not the root issue here. We have a root problem, which is the land animals that we're raising for our food and agriculture system. And this system and many of the environmental issues we're facing are all listed up here. Everything from resource depletion, fresh water, pollution, species extinction. But as I'm going to tell you in a minute, none of these are actually the root issues. And that's why I don't like talking about just sustainability, and I say we have to go beyond sustainability. But first, let's talk just very quickly about another chart. This is one of my favorites to show, and it's actually one I taught high school previously for a little bit, chemistry and environmental science. And this is a chart that I taught in environmental science. And it's an energy pyramid, also known as trophic levels, for those of you that maybe know any biology. But when we wonder, why is animal agriculture so detrimental to the planet? Why does it have such a huge negative impact? This chart, to me, really explains why. If you think about it this way, all energy to sustain life on this planet originally comes from the sun. That is how life on this planet exists. And we have to have plants or microorganisms that photosynthesize to turn that sun's energy into food and fuel to support themselves and then the rest of life on Earth. So humans, mammals, cows, pigs, fish, none of us can take the sun's energy directly and convert it to food and fuel and energy. We all have to consume our energy in the form of food, where plants don't have to, right? They do photosynthesis, they can convert the sun's energy themselves. So what this chart is showing is that in biology, every time energy is transferred from one organism to another, there's a very big loss of energy. So if we think of all the sun's energy originally coming in as 100% of energy, it's hitting plants, microorganisms, algae being converted into fuel, and those plants then store that energy in their cells. So that's this first level here, 100%. Primary producers is what photosynthesizers are called. Then we move to the second level of this energy pyramid, which are our consumers, our primary consumers. They can be small insects, small mammals, whoever is directly eating the plants next. But we can see there's that number, it goes from 100% to 10%. What that means is that in the process of any living being eating plants to get their energy, they take about 10% of the energy that they consume and store it in their tissue, and it actually fuels them. The other 90% of that energy is lost as heat in that energy transfer. And we go up the next level, right? So then whoever is eating those herbivores, those primary consumers, they're that secondary level there, then another 90% of the energy is lost in that transfer. So when we get up to the top here, these are our carnivores and animals that are eating other animals that are eating other animals. So much of that energy has been lost. that you can imagine it takes vastly more resources, food, and energy to sustain the life of a carnivore than it does the life of an herbivore. So people come at me and they say, isn't it natural to eat meat? Isn't eating animals natural? Like, we're part of the food chain, we're at the top of the food chain. But nothing we are doing today is natural, right? Living in homes with air conditioning, windows, concrete buildings, driving, coming to places like Summerfest, buying your food in plastic wrapped containers in the grocery store, buying a piece of meat or a carton of eggs in styrofoam. There's nothing natural about that. The reality is, when we look at this chart, we all have a choice every single day, 3 times a day, about where we, as logical humans, can choose to enter this energy web and the food pyramid. So we can choose to behave like those carnivores and take a vastly excessive amount of energy and resources to sustain our life, eating so high up on this energy web. Or we can choose to enter this energy pyramid lower down, behaving like the herbivores, that if you've listened to many of the other doctors and scientists here this week, that is what we are biologically designed to be. And when we behave like those herbivores, we conserve and save so much energy. It is so much more efficient to feed people on a plant-based diet than it is when we act like carnivores. So this is the why behind part of why animal agriculture has such a detrimental environmental impact and why it takes so much more land, energy, time, water, every kind of resource to feed the world animal-based diets than plant-based diets. But I showed you all those environmental problems at the beginning, and I want to tell you today why sustainability is not enough and why we have to go beyond sustainability. So I made this tree to kind of illustrate. I think all of these various environmental problems we're facing are what I call symptoms. None of them are the root issue. Climate change, not a root issue. Species extinction, not a root issue. Pollution, not a root issue. They're all symptoms of a problematic mentality and paradigm and a way in which we are engaging, living, and interacting with this planet and nature. That is our root issue. So the roots are the domination, the exploitation, the oppression, the consumerism. It's this paradigm that we are operating under right now, which is that we humans are, might makes right, we're at the top of the food chain, we can exploit, dominate, extract resources from this planet, and we can do it all, whatever we want, for profit, for taste, for convenience, for pleasure, just because we want to. That's the mentality we're living with right now. And that's causing all these problems. It's producing all of these symptoms. So if we want to address all these environmental problems, if we want to figure out how to live sustainably, we have to get to these root issues here. So this is an example of what happens when, for example, we just focus on the symptoms rather than the root issue. So I've seen this a lot in the environmental community recently. Everyone's talking about sustainability. Sustainability has become such a big talking point. We need to live sustainably, eat sustainably, we need to address climate change. And these are examples of what happens when we don't address the underlying root paradigm issues and we just focus on sustainability. We get things like, let's just feed cows some new types of seaweed we found so they burp and fart a lot less methane and therefore don't contribute to climate change as much. Not getting at the root issue, right? Or let's stop climate change by spraying some particles into the sky to block the sun rather than stopping producing greenhouse gases. So these are examples of a narrow reductionist focus just on sustainability or just on climate change. And this is another one. Did anybody hear about this dairy farm, this fire? So this was in the news a lot. It's one of the worst dairy farm fires in a very long time. 18,000 cows were basically burned alive in this fire. And it's not super obvious, unless you look really closely at these articles, what exactly the cause of the fire is. When you look closely, they start to say it was like maybe a methane reactor, maybe some farm equipment. Well, there's other articles a lot going on in the dairy and animal agriculture industry right now, where there's been so much focus on climate change and sustainability, particularly around the methane that cows produce, which contributes to greenhouse gas and contributes to climate change. So guess what farmers have started doing a lot of recently? They've started trying to build methane capturing systems where they collect the methane, both that cows are farting and burping, and that manure piles, which as they break down, they release a lot of methane as well. And we have, millions of tons of manure from all of our different farming operations. Well, farmers are trying to literally put things in place where they're capturing all that gas and that methane released from all these different areas in agriculture and selling it to natural gas companies. Well, guess what? Methane is an incredibly flammable gas. So this fire, when you look behind the scenes and look, kind of between the lines at what it is, you can start to see that they actually were trying to be more sustainable at this farm and had created a methane capturing system, which also helped make this fire as bad as it was. So again, an example of why we need to go beyond sustainability and address the root causes. So I have done a lot of work in the environmental community over the last few years, going back to when I was in college, participating in a lot of both vegan activism on campus as well as environmental activism. And I have been so incredibly frustrated over the years at the environmental community's unwillingness to address this and actually talk about animal agriculture. And so that's why I put the information I have on my van and do a lot of what I do. Because I've seen they start to talk about environmental justice. There's a lot of talk about including people in sustainability conversations and climate change conversations, but we haven't really gotten past that yet. And I see these environmental communities are so ignoring these root issues. And they're kind of creating a narrative that is really excluding the very things we need to be focusing on. In particular, I remember being at one meeting in college where we were talking about this protest. We were going to try and get the college to divest from fossil fuels. Come into this meeting, and they're serving literally a plate of non-vegan cookies and cow's milk. And I asked the organizers, I said something like, how does this make sense that we're talking about addressing climate change and yet you're literally serving foods that are directly contributing to the problem that we want to address? And I got a lot of answers like, well, individuals don't really matter. We need to focus on systems change, blaming corporations, not individuals. Our personal choices don't make a difference. And I find this so deeply problematic because as much as we need the systems to change, and we absolutely do, how can we expect systems to change? How can we expect corporations, CEOs, politicians to do something that will make them less likely to get reelected, lose a little bit of profit, if we ourselves are unwilling to give up a few minutes of taste pleasure and swap a burger for a bean burrito or something like that? So individuals make up these systems, and the change has to start with us so that we can change the systems. And that is how this change, really happens. But there's a bigger issue here too. So when I say beyond sustainability, one of the things that bothers me most about the sustainability conversation is that, let's think about cats and dogs for a minute. How many of you know people who, if there was a scientific study that came out that said it's way more sustainable and we can combat climate change a whole lot better if we start eating stray cats and dogs, or if we start killing off people because we have a population issue, this is how to live sustainably. How many of you think people would go for that and be like, yeah, sustainability, let's do it? No, it sounds ridiculous. Yet that's what we're doing when we talk about, is it more sustainable to raise animals grass-fed or in factory farms? Is it more sustainable to kill animals this way or this way? What that conversation does is ignores who the real victims are in this situation. And it can be very hard for us as humans to wrap our head around massive numbers, right? 18,000 dairy cows dying. 18,000, that's a lot of sentient feeling individuals that it can be hard to process. We kill every single year around the world 70 billion land animals for meat, dairy, and eggs. But what that really means is that 70 billion sentient feeling individuals who deserve the right to their lives, their bodies, their autonomy. They want to live just like we do. They feel pain, pleasure, suffering, joy, all just like we do. So we need to be bringing them into this conversation. And now, don't get me wrong, we need to be talking about sustainability. We need to share the facts about the environmental issues that animal agriculture causes. But let's be conscious of that when we do it, that we have to remember who the real victims are, and that this is also a justice movement for them. And at its heart, that's what veganism is. It's not just a diet or a way of living. It is a principle that if we can live happy and healthy lives without hurting and harming and exploiting others, why not do so? So we have to move beyond sustainability to recognize the justice and the individuals, which is also why environmental issues matter, right? When we talk about, I have this picture up here of some orangutans in a forest that has been clear-cut and burnt and cut down. So we can talk about the Amazon forest fires and these environmental problems, but we have to remember they don't just matter because, it's the environment and we want to protect it. They matter because of the individuals whose lives are being lost. The habitat that's being lost means those are individuals who are going to suffer and feel pain and die or lose family members or friends because of those fires, because of those habitat losses. And that's true of humans too. That's what environmental justice is about. So let's extend that circle of compassion to environmental justice to include the other sentient beings that we share this planet with. And by doing that, by embracing a vegan ethic, we get at the root issues of domination, exploitation, and extraction, and we stop viewing our fellow earthlings and the planet we live on as a resource for us to extract and consume from, and we can start to live in harmony with them instead. This is the future. We are going to create change. We are going to create a compassionate, just, and sustainable world for all beings by transforming our paradigm from an exploitative, domination-based one to a compassionate, vegan, sustainable one. Thank you so much, and this is where you can find me.